Hello and welcome to POW Thanet's Mind Body Week. It's day 4 now. We're zooming down your laptops every night. Firstly, apologies. We've been having a chat already about this, and I've been thinking about it today, that we haven't got a BSL interpreter or audio descriptions for this session. And this is something I feel really passionate about making integral to our events going forward. So watch this space. We're learning a lot as we go. Thank you for being here. It's going to be a really inspiring one. We'll be about an hour max. Last night's sex talk was amazing. You can rewatch that on YouTube if you missed it. And the rest of this week looks like tomorrow night, join Zoe Murphy for a craft along empowerment banner making workshop. Saturday night is Josie Long with her stand-up show about childbirth and climate change. And that one won't go on YouTube, so you've got to be there live or you'll miss that one. And then Sunday morning, 11 a.m, Joe Miller's workshop called Fierce Female Embodiment, which is offering techniques to support boundaries, harness anger, and ignite desire. And the session won't be recorded, so it'll be another safe space. You can bring your rage. And now I'm really excited for this panel talk, hosted by the brilliant Dani St James, who is co-founder of Not a Phase, an organisation set up to support trans and gender non-conforming people. And she's a badass goddess, power woman. So I'll let her intro the guests. Keep using the chat box for questions, and we'll try and fit them all in at the end. Thank you, Dani. Over to you, love.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. So tonight we are joined with Vicky Oliver and Susanne Ida from 1 3/4, Cassie Leon from Cocoa Butter Club, and Daze Aghaji from the Extinction Rebellion Youth Regen Coordinator. Tonight we're going to be having a conversation around language, spaces, acceptance, tolerance, gender, pronouns, toilets, nightclubs, cafes, hair, food, social media, families, politics, life, and the way we do things in general. That's a lot. We're also going to be talking about how we deal with all of this during the pandemic. It's a lot to cover, but it's how we approach these things. It's a mindset and a way of being. I'm sure that it goes without saying that transphobia, racism, ableism, ageism of any kind is not welcome in this room, or indeed this world. Before we start, I'm going to get everybody to introduce themselves with their names, a bit about themselves and their pronouns, and I'll kick it off. My name is Dani St James, and as Amy said, I am the co-founder of Not a Phase. We're currently in charity registration, which is a long experience. But at the moment, we are working as a non-profit in supporting trans and gender non-conforming people get into the mainstream workforce. We do that through education on a corporate level and helping trans-owned businesses, as well as running other things that help the trans community in general. So if we want to go around, should we start with Susanne and Vicky, if you want to say hello?
Hi there, I'm Vicky. I'm the artistic director at 1 3/4, who's a brand new theatre company based in Canterbury, and we're making work about disabled stories. I was a theatre practitioner for 15 years before I was medically retired due to disability, and for some reason I just can't stay away, so I'm kind of sneaking back into it at the moment.
Hi, I'm Susie. I'm also from 1 3/4. I founded the whole thing last year, and at the moment, sort of doing admin things, writing, performing, producing, a bit of everything, just as Vicky really. Yeah, as Vicky already said, at the moment we're currently working on our first piece called Conversations with a Cripple. It's about our own stories, things that have happened to us, the things that we experience every day. I study drama and theatre at the University of Kent. I have a performance background, a bit of writing in there, and yeah, that's me.
Thank you. Cassie?
Hi, I'm Cassie. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a theatre and cabaret producer. So I kind of specialise in ensuring that people of colour, queer people of colour, access the right funding that is available for them from like Arts Council and things like that. So I assist with Arts Council applications. I'm also the producer of the Cocoa Butter Club, which is a cabaret collective who are dedicated to celebrating and showcasing performers of colour, and making sure that people are very, very aware that bodies of colour can do all the things that white bodies can do. So Black people can hula hoop and breathe fire and do gymnastics all at the same time, just like everybody else.
Thank you. And Daze.
Hi, I'm Daze. I'm a youth climate activist. My main role is in Extinction Rebellion as their regenerative culture coordinator, which is basically really radical well-being. But I'm best known for actually my political endeavours. I'm the youngest person to run for the EU Parliament from the UK. And also I'm currently working with a small foundation called Belgrave on how we can start funding radical youth projects.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So we're going to start the conversation off tonight with Susanne and Vicky from 1 3/4. Susanne, can you tell us more about situations that motivated you to do the work that you do?
Oh, well, that's a bit of a story, but I'm going to try and keep it short. So I'm visually impaired myself. My whole life, I've lived from this. I've lived with this. I think it started when I was 2.5, so I don't really know it any different. And I've always really been interested in entertaining people, arts, theatre, writing and telling stories. And I think I've just hit a point last year especially where I was so frustrated with how the world sees people with a disability. I can only really talk for myself, really. But some of the stuff that I've experienced in the past just made me realize that people have really fixed images in the head when it comes to people, especially from my perspective, with a visual impairment. And I just wanted to change that and wanted to show people that, really we're just like everyone else. Because of my studies, I think, that was the perfect opportunity. And I came up with the idea for Conversations with a Cripple, which is a piece that is based on our stories. We try and approach the whole thing, with comedy, which I think works really well because comedy connects with people, like laughter, we all connect with people. And Conversations with a Cripple is about that concept of having a little angel and a devil on your shoulder that both tell you what to do. Because there's stereotypes that I have experienced. Either you are a good disabled person or a bad disabled person, you kind of have to live up to these things, which is really difficult to explain. But sorry.
Oh, I didn't say anything.
No, sorry. I think that started the whole thing off, really. Just trying to let the world know that we're just like everyone else, and that it's not as easy to say there's only one type of disabled people and there's only another type of disabled people. It's a huge range. There's a lot of variety.
Somebody's disabled also.
Sorry?
You can't always just look at somebody and tell that they're living with a disability.
Yeah, exactly. That's for example, that is one of my, because I've lived with my disability for such a long time, I don't really seem that disabled, I suppose. And I have a guide dog. And you would be surprised the amount of times people ask me if I'm training my guide dog, because obviously, well, I say, people, I suppose people have a very specific image in mind when they think of a blind person, probably, I don't know, sunglasses, or probably a bit older, but yeah, it doesn't have to be like that. There's all types of disabled people, yeah.
Amazing, thank you. Vicky, can you tell us a bit more about your life living with disability, the struggles that you have with accessibility, that sort of thing? We'd really be interested in hearing about also what we can do as able-bodied people that can make your life a little bit easier.
Okay, that's a huge amount of stuff. No, it's good to be that broad. So I didn't really identify as disabled or feel like I was disabled maybe until about 4 years ago. I was born with a gene mutation, which I've only just found out, and also on the hypermobility spectrum, which are two things that have constantly been there, but gradually over the years they've got worse until I ended up in quite a health crisis. I've got an amazing diagnosis that reads like a medical textbook, which is fascinating. I have something called Behçet syndrome. There's about 1,000 of us in the country, which may or may not come from this gene mutation, auto-inflammatory overlap, fibromyalgia, the hypermobility spectrum, and what's the other one? Bipolar. So it kind of reads on the outside like this huge amount of medical stuff going on. But I find the kind of lived reality of it really different to kind of what these kind of doctors and stuff write down, and I think I'm really interested in telling what that lived reality is about. And so it was when life became quite challenging to live, so things like work became a struggle, things like accessing just the world became a struggle. So that might be accessing transport, it could be trouble even driving my car, for example. That's when the world kind of started to close down for me, and I didn't really understand what was going on, despite having this kind of medical diagnosis. And then what happened for me is I discovered like-minded people online and a really strong online community of similar people, and suddenly realised that this word disabled existed, and it wasn't a bad word. It explained exactly what was happening to me, that it wasn't, my body wasn't the thing that was disabled. I was being disabled by not being able to access the world around me, and it was the world that was inaccessible, and I didn't need to be fixed anymore, which was a kind of huge thing to come to terms with. That yes, of course, my health professionals have a huge input in my life, but actually coming to kind of some terms with that word and accepting that my body is just something that needs a slower, kind of more gentle way of life, was really important. And so inside of that was this whole kind of story of what had happened, and I felt like I'd changed quite a lot as a person, and I kind of became quite proud of being a disabled person. And I think that's something that we are trying to like tell, that disability isn't abnormal. We're just normal people with disabilities, and we want people to be seen in the world, without necessarily being seen about their issues.
Sure. I suppose the online presence and social media helped you have that outreach with the wider community also then?
Hugely, yeah. And it also introduced me to disability activism as well, which was really empowering. There's something about that kind of belonging, or calling that collective power, that is really important there. And I think that when I met Susie, it was like, we've got very different disabilities, that you know, our experiences of having impairments are very different, but there's kind of those intersections where we have things that cross. So yeah, and one of those was with conversations that I very much experienced in moving into activism, that people don't always like you to ask for more or be outspoken, or ask for change. And that was what I think when Susie was talking about a good disabled person and a bad disabled person, that this kind of stereotypes that are out there are the kind of, there's the Tiny Tim kind of stereotype, that there's the kind of poor disabled person that needs rescuing, and they're in an awful place, and eventually, if they kind of, from the outside, or they find it within, they triumph over their kind of disability, and then on the other end there's the disabled person that's quite bitter and twisted. And we were looking at characters today, and we were thinking about how Richard III is often represented, and he's this bitter, twisted, kind of villainous character because of his disability. And not only like kind of in his mind is he, but he also is presented as this kind of, you know, hunched over, bitter, twisted physical character. Yeah. And that's the kind of realm that you kind of sit in as a disabled person and play with your activism. So when we've created these two characters, the devil and the angel, that kind of your conscience sitting on your shoulder, they're kind of arguing about which side you should be on, and actually you're just a normal person in between all that, trying to navigate things like things that we cover in conversations are things like getting the bus or booking a cinema ticket. They're really basic everyday things, but I think the way we've changed it is, instead of making it quite angry or kind of about an issue, it's very funny. So these characters end up rowing in a very amusing way with each other.
Yeah, I guess your shared knowledge of comedy between both of you allows you to portray the message in a more accessible way to everybody.
Yeah, and have some really frank, let you in on the really frank, let the audience in on the really frank conversations that go on inside your head, but also we are asking the audience to have that dialogue with us, and opening up that conversation, that it's okay to ask about disability and okay to ask what is and isn't okay.
Yeah,
absolutely. Go on, sorry.
In fact, I think Vicky and me, we both agree we would always prefer people asking than just assuming, because yeah, that, you know, if people is the amount of times that has happened to me where people just assumed that I would be okay with something that they thought would be accessible for me, or, you know, something that they just assumed about my disease or my condition, which ended up being more problematic than helpful. So I think, and, you know, again, we can't talk for other disabled people, but I'm an open book when it comes to that. People can ask me anything and I will tell them my boundaries, if something is too personal or if I don't want to talk about it for whatever reason, and also because of that concept, in conversations, we're also hoping that able-bodied people will find it easier to identify with our characters, because these processes, you know, of having these two voices in your head, one voice telling you to do one thing, the other voice telling you to do the other thing, I'm pretty sure that's something that a lot of people, or most people, have actually in day-to-day situations. So hopefully that's going to help people to understand where we're coming from.
Yeah, I relate a lot to what you just said. Obviously it's not comparable, but as a trans person, I've always had the attitude that if I'd rather somebody ask me and then I explain it with humour and empathy, goes the same way you guys do. And then hopefully the next time they meet a trans person, they won't ask the same question in an insensitive way. And it's just continues that education, and then they'll pass that on to people that are within their circles also. So I completely relate to what you're saying. Yeah, I think it's great. Well, I mean, what's next on the agenda for you guys? What's next for 1 3/4?
So obviously we have not been able to be in our beloved rehearsal space together, which is just a great space for us to really kind of talk through these ideas. It's quite a sacred space, and it feels very safe. And so that losing that was quite difficult. I've been shielding since March, so not like been able to leave at all. So we had the big challenge of what do we do with this amazing work that we've devised and that Susie's then put into a script. And actually we kind of started to embrace the challenge, and I think a lot of arts companies have done this and thought about how does the piece work. So the piece before was a piece of forum theatre, so after each scene the audience were able to vote on whether they thought the angel or the devil should win, and we were kind of forcing people into a decision. So it's a very interactive piece of theatre. So what we've decided to do is to take it into podcast format, and each scenario that we have is an episode, which we are just about to take into online rehearsal at the moment, and it will go up onto our website, and then over a period of 2 weeks after the podcast episode is launched, people will be able to vote on what happens next. So it will affect the script in the same way as it did before. We also like the accessibility of this, so I think that I just think about all the times that I'm an avid theatre and cinema goer and live events. I love live music, but that how many times I haven't been able to go because of being unwell or too tired, or like having issues with pain or kind of mobility. And I have to say that even though shielding's been tough, lockdown has been wonderful because there's been such a wealth of stuff that's accessible online. And I think that it's a really exciting time, and I hope that the world doesn't move too far away from that and we can keep inviting disabled people into those spaces.
Absolutely. I think we've all learned a lot about how little we need to have that physical space requirement as well. So hopefully the accessibility will be included even when we go back to it, and maybe things will be filmed a little bit more and kept online, because I'm sure companies have seen a huge response to people watching from home. Brilliant. Well, thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Move it along just because we're on that hour deadline. And we're going to take things over to Cassie Leon from the Cocoa Butter Club. Hello.
Hey.
Hi, Cassie. I wanted to say, first of all, how much I love your work. I'm surprised that you and I haven't met before, but I know a lot of people that you know, and we've got a lot of crossover. So I just want to say, big fan, first of all. And then to start things off, talking about Cocoa Butter Club, first of all, is what was it that motivated you to start Cocoa Butter Club, and why is it that starting something of performers of colour was so vital to you at that time and moving forward?
So I come from a theatre background. I grew up in Hackney, and then I went to school in Hackney, and then I went to college in Angel, and so I was always surrounded by Black people, by people of colour, by everybody. So it was such a multicultural place that I grew up. And then I went to Manchester Met University, and I'd never been the odd person out, because in Hackney it's 90% Black borough. Yeah. So when I got to university and I was the odd person out, I was completely shocked by that, because I'd never been othered in that way. Then I got to university and had a really weird experience where there was like, I don't know, three Black girls in my class, including me, and then that was it. And so my teacher had this obsession with making a Black theatre company. So she'd already decided what she wanted to do with us. So she kind of like separated us from the rest of the class to and it seemed like it was pardon?
Was she a person of colour?
No, it's a white lady.
Oh,
So
wow.
she decided that what she wanted to do with us without asking anybody what we wanted to do. So she completely separated us from anything else, or being able to interact with the rest of our class in a way that they didn't feel kind of put out, because we got like weird treatment. So I finished university, and then I started a theatre company with an Asian woman. And so we started making shows that were about duos. So shows about JFK and Marilyn Monroe, or game shows in toilets that really had nothing to do with our ethnicity or our experience of being people of colour. But theatres, if we went to a theatre to say, oh, book our show, immediately what they wanted us to do was make shows about travelling from wherever they thought we were from, or like drums. And I was like, well, that's not what our show is about at all. I know that I am a person of colour, but that doesn't, like, my show doesn't reflect that, apart from me being on the stage. So there was a massive thing about representation and about why we were making work, and about my body being in a space that was suddenly politicized in a way that I hadn't realized it had been. And then Sadie Tsunahi, who is the like the founder and creator of Cocoa Butter Club,
I love her.
And she's an incredible person. So I quit my theatre company, I went traveling, I came back, and I was partying way too much, and I needed to find a way back into performance that didn't require me to have to be on the stage. And then I went to a Cocoa Butter Club. So the Cocoa Butter Club had already existed for a year. And then I went to a show, and Sadie stood on stage and said that she needed a person of colour to help her with Arts Council funding, because people kept promising they were going to do it, but people, basically white people, didn't know how to talk to get across everything that we needed. They didn't know how to talk about the people involved. They didn't know how to talk about the spaces that we needed to access that weren't offering us access beforehand. So I was like, well, I do theatre, I like glitter, and I can write about Black people because that's my lived experience. So I became the producer of the Cocoa Butter Club. And I think it's, the Cocoa Butter Club has gone like from strength to strength, because people have really realised that there is no diversity in performance. I think people book shows from people of colour, queer people, when there's a season for it. So it's not something that's integrated into general culture. There has to be like Pride season, or I don't know, Black History Month. Yeah. And then they start to book shows that way around. Whereas I decided that obviously that is not representative of London, at least. So because I came from a theatre background, I started to talk to all those people about why they were booking things for seasons and not just in general, which was one of like the bigger battles that we had to face. And Sadie, as a cabaret performer, would go into, like, be booked as a host, but go into spaces where people thought that they were being helpful, I don't know, ticking their boxes, but she would go into a space and the producers would say things like, oh yeah, cheers, thanks for coming to host our show, here's the dressing room, kind of like, use what you like. And there'd be like hairdressers and like white foundation. So it means that they've understood that she's going to be the host because she brings a new audience in, but they're not actually creating a space for her at all, because she can't actually use the products that they've laid out on the table for everybody to use, because it's the assumption that everybody looks the same. And so it was a massive thing that we had to start working with, about like the things that people of colour require when you go into spaces, who your audiences are, what your door policies are, and all those things kind of like came along with it. So now we work, it's kind of like codes of conduct that kind of has done from like making sure that people's programs are as diverse as possible, but also realizing that just by booking the Cocoa Butter Club doesn't mean that you tick the box for queer performance and tick a box for people of colour, because one show once a year is not going to change your diversity. It's about how you kind of infiltrate that space all year round.
How is it that you would say would be best for people that may be watching this, that are involved with venue management and venue production, how is it that they could create more of a safe space for people of colour, for and kind of nurture and grow that type of atmosphere? What would be your advice for that?
I think it's about representation within staffing, because I think people are never going to understand anybody's experience if they don't have anybody to speak to, or ask about first-hand experience. So there's a massive thing that's happening at the moment because of the whole Black Lives Matter conversations that are happening. People have had to really look at like their anti-racist statements that they're putting out. So people like Roundhouse, like Arts Admin, like Camden People's Theatre, everybody has actually had to sit and look at who comes through their doors, what happens when they're inside, and what people face. But nobody can do that if they don't have people that are employed. So it's how you get things like an H&M jumper that says stupid things on it. It's because there's no Black people in a room questioning why slogans are allowed to be used. So the Cocoa Butter Club also exists as almost like a kind of agency. So if venues have questions about where to find performers of colour, or what their statements should be, or what their rules and regulations should be to support performers of colour, that's why I exist. People can email me and ask me with the help that they need. Instead of making it up and getting it wrong, people can feel free to ask me, to ask Sadie, to ask Cynthia. We have a whole range of people that work with us. And it's like what was said earlier, is that you can't really get anywhere without asking the questions, but people have to be prepared to ask the questions and be prepared to feel a bit uncomfortable if that's what it takes.
Yeah, they have to sit in their uncomfortableness whilst the answers are being delivered to them. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think people should definitely be asking the questions, but also trying to figure it out for themselves, because it's not that difficult. But if you don't have people, if you have say you work for, I don't know, Battersea Arts Centre, and there's not one producer of colour on that team, then there's nobody to pull you up when things are going wrong, or there's nobody to question decisions that are made by a group of white people for performers of colour. So you have to have representation within every sector, every industries, to be able to combat really, really simple mistakes.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you.
Sorry.
And in terms of moving forwards as the Cocoa Butter Club, what are your plans for the future of the club once we finally get out of lockdown in 20 million years?
Yeah, my ideal plan, basically what I decided just today, is that with everybody's anti-racist statements and everybody's transparency about who they employ, if I don't get a producing job in a venue with a decent salary after this, then everybody's failed at their job, because I literally exist. So if by the end of this whole thing, somebody hasn't emailed me and said, oh, actually, yeah, I've realised that all our staff are white and we don't actually know what we're doing, can you help? Then everybody's failed. For the Cocoa Butter Club, we're going to be on like a world tour. I've decided that in this time, because we work here, we work around Europe, but it's about time that the Arts Council were like, actually, this performance, we need to build a production that could be picked up and taken everywhere. So if it's a little bit like the structure of Hot Brown Honeys, and they're an incredible group of people from Australia. Okay. Is what the Cocoa Butter Club are going to be doing.
Amazing. World domination for the Cocoa Butter Club.
100%. Because there's no point of going to Underbelly every year and the Cocoa Butter Club being the only collective out of 200 collectives that have that's only performers of colour, because it just doesn't in London. Is you can't keep going to festivals where it's only white performance, it's white girls with blonde hair on stilts, because I can walk on stilts. So you could definitely employ me too. You can't keep going to places where there is no inclusion and diversity, but sit at home and talk about it and say that you want it to happen. So I'm done with it from now.
Amazing. Good for you. Change the world.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And last but not least, we are going to move on to a chat with Daze from Extinction Rebellion. Daze, hiya.
Hello.
Daze, I wanted to first of all ask you about how it was that you got into Extinction Rebellion.
Wow, that's a long-ish kind of short story. So like, I think, so through most of my life, I never really like saw myself as an environmentalist till I moved to Lincolnshire. And I lived in a boarding house at this point, and my house parents were really, really in touch with nature. And they taught us how to raise chickens, how to, you know, like manage a wormery, all sorts. It was like the strangest, looking back, it was pretty strange experience. Yeah. And through that, I fostered such a love for nature and the natural world around me. And then when I came to London, I ended up getting really ill due to air pollution. And I ended up developing asthma quite badly. And I looked for answers, and then online I found out it was actually air pollution, and that this has been happening, especially to communities of colour, working class communities, because that's where things like incinerators are built in these areas. And it just made me really angry. So I went through around 3 years of just kind of being angry, but not really doing enough about it either. Totally disconnected from NGOs, political parties, seeing that they were useless, but not really doing anything about it. And when I got to uni, I was actually it was around last year, January, I had meningitis and I was really depressed, and I had depression at the time. And I was just in a place of not really knowing what to do. And my friend, she was really trying to help me, and she was like, I'm going to this meeting, it's about the environment, I really think you would love it, I think you should come along. And honestly, I was like, oh God, I might as well, right? I've got nothing else to be doing. So I did go, and that meeting, when I say it was a very, very kind of U-turn in my life, I went there, we were so close, because I got really anxious before going in. We were so close to just going to the pub instead. And someone so loving and so caring, who didn't even know who I was, told me to come in and she'll make me a cup of tea. And that's how it all started. And it was finding this community that really got my grief and my loss and my feelings about the environment, but also had that really urgent call for action. It was amazing. And even actually touching upon what Vicky was saying before, I actually have learning disabilities, quite severe learning disabilities. And this was the first place that didn't ask me for a CV, but allowed me to show the skills that I have. And just the way of, giving me something to do and allowing me to succeed in that in a way that the normal working force would have never. It was really quite something. And then since then, it's been over a year now, and I'm still here. And I'm taking on the role of making sure that this space is open for everyone and anyone, and that is through the Regenerative Cultures work.
That's incredible. And you're part of the youth arm of Extinction Rebellion, right?
Yeah, because we within activism, there is this kind of almost old stuffiness sometimes, without changing and seeing moving with the world that's currently happening around us. And a couple of us who were working in XR at that time saw that there was a real need to create a space for young people to be who they are, especially within young people. Our ideas of the world are very different. We are more inclined to want to be inclusive. We're more inclined, well, actually, weirdly enough, majority of us are actually queer as well, which I think is quite interesting to say the least. And we wanted to create a space that included everyone, and that's kind of where Extinction Rebellion started. It started from a place of saying, so many movements have got this so wrong so far, that we're going to try and be the ones who are going to make the difference.
That's amazing. Yeah, I think you're right about the generational change. My brother is 17, and I've always thought of him as gay, actually. And I said to him recently, when are you going to come out? And he said, God, why is your generation so obsessed with labels? I was like, oh, God, okay. But he's super all about the about climate change, and he's really on it. So I think you're right, and there's a lot of hope in the next generation. So if you're in the youth arm of it, honestly, incredible. So in terms of the work that you're doing with Extinction Rebellion, we know it's urgent, but how bad is what's up ahead of us? What's going on?
Yeah, I think, I try and be this really, really like hopeless romantic all the time and say that everything's going to change and there's hope. But currently it doesn't look like there is hope. And I think that's the worst part. Climate change is here and people still talk about it as though it's something that's happening in the future. It's hitting Indigenous communities, frontline communities, and even COVID showed us the vulnerabilities in our communities and our society for the marginalized communities that we have. That's people of color, that's queer people, that's disabled rebels as well. And now we need to start saying, we know it's coming, what can we do about it? And I think this is where I started doing a lot of the regenerative cultures work, because like at this point we are going to experience some severe forms of climate change, whether that's not so natural weather disasters or flooding or air pollution. We are going to continue. However, we need to start building resilient communities that won't try and eat each other and will really hold each other together during a time of real hardship, and we did see peaks of that in COVID, where people, like communities, were helping elderly people get their shopping, helping disabled people get their shopping, but also we saw the nastiness and the mirror of things like stockpiling that was happening as well. And this is where we need to start creating cultures that hold everyone. And when I say regenerative cultures, it's basically well-being, but it covers like 5 main parts in XR. So the first one is self-care. How can we learn how to take care of ourselves, take care of our emotions, be present and know how to communicate our feelings and what we're holding? But also, how can we learn how to do that radical inner work of purging ourselves of this society and the toxicity that we see in media and in our everyday lives every day? How can we start bringing that healthier self into communication with our friends, our loved ones, and we call that interpersonal care? Then how can we take that level of relationship building and take that into our communities and help hold each other and people who are disadvantaged within this world? Fourth is action care, which is in these really high, especially with Extinction Rebellion being a civil disobedience movement, we have people gluing on to roads for 6 hours. How can we learn how to hold their feelings and care for them during that time? There's been times where I've been out in the rain with an umbrella and a book and I'm reading to someone for an hour or feeding them food. And that's us caring for our community. And finally, how can we take this learned attitude of care and empathy onto the earth as well?
Oh my goodness, you are so moving to listen to. I felt like tearing up then. You're incredible. Thank you for that. And I wanted to touch on what you said before about obviously the effects are becoming visible already. We can see it around us. How is it that you would say, if you were to give your top 5 tips, what can we do as individuals to lessen this damage? What can we do to help?
Yeah, I think the first one is we need to start understanding our democracy. I feel like there is this deliberate aim to make sure that we aren't educated as the populace from the governments. Because when they tell us, oh yeah, we can't do that, we go, okay, that's fine. But totally forgetting that we actually vote them in to represent us. And if they're not doing that, they need to leave. And we need to start like being a lot louder with our voice and a lot louder in our democracies. I think secondly, we need to learn how to like be as well as humans. Our society has shown us to care about the self only, to totally neglect anyone, and it's always like this place of greed that we work from. And we need to learn how to like show that empathy and like be really like emotionally mature and ask for what we need from our communities and from our society. I also think that there needs to be this real like consciousness change of acknowledging our agency and acknowledging the power that we hold as people, especially as people who are like, commonly marginalized. We are so powerful because we have lived life, so we had to be resilient. And we need to start bringing that into the forefront. And I think that's another way that we can get through it. I think I would say finally I would leave it on learning how to raise each other's voices. especially in places where people don't work on their wounds before they enter spaces. They end up using those wounds to punish others. They end up trying to grab for power that they feel like they've never had. And this is like the time where we need to, one, be like gentle on ourselves, because we're all in this learning process, and others, we're all at different points of our journey. But also remembering that, you know, we do care for one another, we care for the earth, we care for our society. And that's why we do the work that we do, because we want to make sure that people are heard, you know.
Oh my goodness, you're literally blowing my mind. I just saw that Amy popped into the chat box, please be Prime Minister. The whole time you were thinking, all I was thinking was, oh my God, why are you not in politics already? I know you're studying at the moment, aren't you? Is that the goal for you? You want to get into politics?
Weirdly enough, I'm studying history and politics, but actually, before all the climate stuff, I want to be a sex historian. I study sexuality, specializing in the early modern period. So that's what I want to do. But if I have to go into politics to get this done.
Oh my God, can you do the sex history as a project on the side? Because we really need you right now. And just to wrap things up, I want to know, obviously, the running theme of tonight's conversation is reimagining the future. What does if you were to reimagine how the future is for us, how would that look to you?
I think the future would be a place where we can actually like learn how to speak and be with one another. I feel like there is such like, I don't know, it's like this feeling of like, I remember like the first time, so in XR, before every meeting, we do a check-in. So we say, how are we? Where are we coming into this meeting from? What are the emotions that we're holding? And my knee-jerk reaction was, I'm fine. But I had been depressed for 5 months and I very much wasn't fine. But I was so like, I remember like a month in, I had this moment of like pure catharsis where I just cried because I never learned how to process emotions, you know. And I feel like once we start learning how to process these really powerful emotions that we hold in our body, that we feel as tension, feel as pain, like think revolutionary stuff will happening. And once we start to listen as well and hold these really difficult conversations that are just needed to have, like we'll start having like a world which cares for one another, which cares for the earth, and in turn, hopefully, all the like societal issues that we face right now will disappear.
Oh my God, you're incredible, Daze. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm actually going to work back on myself quickly and ask everybody that question. And I wanted to ask Cassie, what does the world in the future reimagined look like to you?
For me, it's a place where people, obviously I'm talking from a theatre perspective, but it's where theatres, venue owners, organisations don't feel completely affronted by being asked to be transparent and are actually held accountable for the things that they say and then the things that they actually do. So I think at the moment, I've been looking at everybody's kind of like anti-racism statements that have, in 2020, the fact that people have had to write anti-racism statements is just bizarre to me, that people are still shocked that things happen, but also that people have actually had to start taking notice of what they're doing. So for me, it would be things like people's staffing lists, people's diversity lists, people's pay gap lists by kind of like gender and ethnicity pay gaps. Everything would be kind of published every 6 months to see actually what change people are actually making and not just saying.
Yeah.
It would be things like Black history would be taught in primary schools as part of your curriculum and not as a month, because people have been in this country since like the 17th century. So I don't know why we don't talk about them being here. And a lot of a lot of young Black people of colour don't have any idea why they are here, because if you're not taught at home and you're not taught in school, you just happen to have turned up, and then slavery happened. So I think like the curriculum needs to change so that actually people have a better understanding collectively, so that people can ask questions and people can talk about it without, again, feeling embarrassed, feeling uninformed, or feeling upset. And Black British history, I think, is really important, because we talk a lot about Black history in America. We don't talk about Black history in Britain. and why people are here, how they got here, and what this country's effects on other places have been.
Yeah.
So I think for me, it's about my idea of the future is about continuing this revolution, basically, and making sure that nobody has an excuse to say that they didn't know and they don't have access to, because that's just not true.
Yeah, I think you're right. It all starts with education. My boyfriend is Black, but he was adopted by white parents when he was an infant, and he grew up in Surrey in an all-white area. And he told me recently that up until he was like a pre-teen, he thought that once he reached a certain age, he had to go and work in Victoria train station, because that's the only time he ever saw other Black people. Because he had no education about Black people in the UK. He was the only one in the village that he was from, and he had no idea about it. And it blew my mind that we're so far behind on teaching kids about diversity.
Yeah, so my partner works in a school, and they're talking about like the kind of decolonizing the curriculum so that actually people are aware. And a comment that she got today was, if you teach primary school children about racism, does that mean that you're introducing them to painful things too early? But obviously that comment has come from a white person who doesn't have to experience anything or talk about anything if they don't want to. But if you are a person of color, you have to have that conversation when you're 1 and when you're 2 and when you're 3 and ongoing. So if things are normalized from a very young age, everybody should basically, there's an unconscious bias thing, a program on BBC maybe, that is about trying to make a non-racist school, and the unconscious bias training about why people think certain things about other people without even realizing it. And it's a really, really interesting program to watch about young people and what they think is acceptable and what they don't realize isn't. I think it's a really good program to start with. But yeah, I think everybody should be buying books about Black children. If you can imagine a wizard in Harry Potter, then why can't you imagine Black characters in films? That's weird.
Yeah, 100%. Thank you so much, babe. I'm going to pass it back to Vicky. Vicky, what does the future look like reimagined to you?
I think to follow on from both Daze and Cassie, really, and especially about that kind of collective support that Daze that you were talking about, and that kind of fear factor being taken away for people to ask questions around these issues, knowing that we all do have unconscious bias, and that the only way to unlearn it is to kind of learn that we've got it, and instead of kind of then getting offended by it or kind of saying, well, that wasn't my intention all the time, about being able to process that and learn from it and change. I think that kind of comes across all the intersections, really. In terms of disability, I think it would come back to me personally. I think it would be for the world to stop putting money into trying to cure or fix disabled people through kind of charities or kind of funding, and actually put that money and effort into improving disabled people's lives, in making the world more accessible place. Amazing. Because a cure could be, I don't know, 50 years away, or not even in our lifetime, whereas it's important to live the lives we're living now.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. Susanne, last but not least, what does the future reimagined look like to you?
Very much agree with basically what everyone has said. I would just like to live in a world where you can discuss things openly, and ask questions openly without, and educate each other, help to learn, help to, just create more awareness about all sorts of topics. And it would be, in terms of, looking at it from disability, I think it would be so nice to create, as Vicky said, to create a society where, you can ask for help or people ask you without being judged, without, assuming that you need certain things to be fixed, and that, disability comes in all sorts of variations, and that disability is not a bad word as well. We are very much able to do all sorts of things. We just might have to find our own ways and techniques to do it, and it would be nice for people to accept that, and to maybe to even help us to find these ways, rather than trying to say, oh, this is the only way that this can work.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Amy, have we got any time for any Q&A, or are we at an end?
If you feel comfortable with people in the room, and we could maybe stick around till 1:15, we could have a little look at some of these questions in the box, because this has been so incredible. Thank you all so much. I've been so moved. I just keep wanting to clap and scream. You're just all incredible people. So shall we work our way down the question box? There's one from Darren, the Daze.
Here we go. Let me find it.
I could just ask it myself if that's all right.
Yeah, you asked it. Darren wrote it. There you go.
Daze, first of all, great to meet you. I'm a member of Extinction Rebellion, and I'm very good at standing on a street corner with a placard and chanting. But what I'm finding really difficult is kind of reaching out and reaching out to people who don't already believe, if you know what I mean. Even my partner's like, oh my God, you're going off to, you're going to go stand on a street corner for 6 days. What's wrong with you, kind of thing. But, and I just feel like at the moment, almost with the whole care thing and what's happened with COVID, is this incredible amount of care that's going on. And I'm working at a food bank, and there's a lot of, it's all volunteers, and there's all this love going, between people helping each other at the moment. But there's two angles to it. Number one, oh my God, a food bank generates the most unbelievable amount of waste, which is not recyclable. That drives me insane. But also, like, we've got this connection now with people, and it's something I'd like to learn to do, is how do you, without becoming a Bible basher, bring up the topics with people that you've now got contact with. We are asking people to to recycle their bags, that they give them back to us the next week when the delivery driver goes. We are asking people to return things like egg boxes so we can reuse them. But yeah, it just feels like we do have, of course there's been all the hate, but we do have this moment now where people are caring about each other, and a lot of people have stepped up to the cause to go, okay, we need to help, we need to feed, we need to make sure that people are going to survive this. And it would be, so I just don't know how to then translate that into the next step, which is then looking out for the planet and going, well, actually, if we can do this for each other, surely we can expand that. And I don't know if there's any resources or anything or learning that can be had from XR on that.
I think there are some things. So, I think first of all, it's making sure that we don't allow this burden of the environmental collapse to just hang on us as individuals. Because I like how a lot of plastic pollution campaigns are also the campaigns that are being paid for by BP. Because if we start blaming ourselves for the climate crisis, it leads the actual big companies who are the ones that are responsible for it to kind of just go, oh, it's your fault. You don't recycle. You use a lot of oil and gas. It's your fault. And understanding this is a systemic issue, and especially in the way that I see the climate crisis, I see it as a byproduct of all the other isms that we've failed to address. This is ableism. This is racism. This is sexism. This is the byproduct, because what's happened is we've used the ways that we relate to one another, and we've taken it to the earth. But the earth goes, we don't act the earth. It literally does not need us being here. Life, nature flourishes wherever. In Chernobyl, nature is flourishing, where we can't live. So that's just like to put it, like nature does not need us, but we are currently making the earth inhabitable for our own species, which shows you everything. So I think it's really like, one, making sure that people understand it's not laying on them, it's laying on the people who are actually doing the damage. And two, I think it is getting people into a space of where there is no defense, where it is like an open space. Like, for example, like one of my friends that I do activism with, he's not racist intentionally, but he is racist, and he doesn't even understand or even notice it. He has no bad intentions or anything, but he is racist. He comes across with microaggressions sometimes. But what you need to do is have that conversation and go, you know, this person, we need to talk. You know, this is what's happening. This is what makes me feel uncomfortable. And this is how we can move on with this. And the same with the environment. It's just saying, like, there is people, like, you know, I think it's especially like with, like, for example, I grew up in poverty in Tottenham. So I know what it's like to feel impoverished. I know what it's like to not have enough. I know what it's like to be forgotten. And I feel like a lot of people, especially people going to a food bank, can relate to those kind of real anger at the establishment about what they're doing. But it's basically recognizing that this is happening to other people as well. And the climate crisis is one, like, for example, like Indigenous frontline communities who are there, like, for example, like my family's from the Niger Delta region where the 2015 Shell oil spill happened. And understanding that this has had dramatic effects on people's lives, people who had nothing to do with these decisions, and now they're suffering from it. And it's that level of being able to, like, see each other as humans and know what you would not want to happen to you, and making sure that doesn't happen to another person. It's that, like, we're appealing to people's responsibilities, you know. And I think, like, I was reading a book called Good Chemistry by Dr. Julian Holland, and she basically talks about how when we bring uncomfortable situations, our actual bodies, not just our minds, go into fight or flight. So first you stiffen up and you're like, whoa, okay, so either I'm gonna argue a point that I don't actually agree with, but I don't want to be wrong, or you're going to go, I don't want to hear it, I'm just not interested whatsoever. And that's what happens when you bring up things like the environment, because the environment feels so big and it holds so much, and you feel helpless within that situation. So either you fight or flight it. But when we actually go into a place of going, you know, we need to have this conversation, it is serious, feel for the empathy, but also don't allow this to become something that feels like a weight that only you are carrying. All of us are carrying this, you know, and opening up that space to ask, like, you know, someone said, oh yeah, like I did a panel the other day and someone was like, so sorry, I don't know what net zero says, like what net zero means, please can you keep this question anonymous? And it's like, you shouldn't have shame for asking questions, and asking questions is the way we're going to get things done. So I think it's really creating this really like open and non-judgmental space to ask these questions, to have these conversations, and to express everything that we're holding.
Yeah. Yes, because I always end up having incredible conversations in my head about I need to get rid of my car, but then like I can't actually do my job without my car, and then I have these moral panics about, you know, about my car all the time, but I can't actually do my job without it. But in the end, it's, you know, we need to have a scrappage scheme like they did with diesel 20 years ago, where we scrap our cars for electric cars or whatever. But it has to come from higher up.
Because I think, just to put in that, so I think we have to demand for it, and like imagine like the government as our like logistics. So we say this is what we want. The government is obliged to, just by democracy, to logistically make that happen. And I think that's what we need to remember, that this is like us telling the government what to do, not the government telling us what they can't do for us. And remembering, like, where does sovereignty and power really lie? It lies with the people to tell them what to do for us.
Absolutely, very good point. I think we have a question here from Vic.
Oh, Darren, you've just popped yourself on mute, hun. We've got a question, did you say?
There's a question from Vicky.
I just really wanted to ask a question around the kind of, what does disability what does activism look like for disabled people? I know that I've followed Extinction Rebellion closely. I've really wanted to be active in it, but have felt that it's inaccessible in many ways. And I think the same has happened recently. Even the wording around kind of activism, march, kind of making a stand, they're all words that are kind of all about able-bodied things. How does activism look different for different people, I think, is really what I'm getting at. How is it safe for different people to access?
Yeah, I think one, I'll point you in the XR Disabled Rebels network, because they're awesome, so awesome, and they create new ways. Like, for example, we're currently piloting online rebellion for people who won't be able to join us due to their disabilities. And also, I think it's finding where you fit within this. Like, for example, like I sit in like an organizational roles because of my learning disabilities. I get overstimulated quite easily. So I can't go to marches, or I actually feel like the weight of the world, and I feel like very hectic, and it takes me a couple of days to mellow out to normal. So it's finding out where you fit, like whether that is in like, you know, like a lot of our disabled rebels tend to work in places like the back office, which is the people who support people who've been arrested, tend to also we're trying to make sure that we have the accessibility equipment as well. In October, the police actually raided our storage and took all of our accessibility equipment, which made our October Rebellion not as accessible as it was planned to, but we tried to make a way. And I don't know if you saw the action from the Disability Network, who went to the Met Police with asking for their accessibility equipment back. So I think there is this kind of like big fight of how can we do this, and we're creating so many new ways to make sure that activism is for everyone. And it's just about finding, you know, the beat of your own drum within such a loud and confusing space of activism.
Yeah, totally. That's something you said today, and about that kind of supporting each other that I didn't kind of realise was actually there in Extinction Rebellion. And I think it's quite an exciting movement because it is changing what kind of action does look like for people. Because I've definitely sat at home kind of doing a lot of reading, sharing a lot of stuff online, and then been made to feel quite guilty by posts where people say activism is about getting off your bum and not just sharing stuff. And actually, for some people, that is like, it is what it looks like, and that's really important that that is recognised and that it is a safe space. And also, like you say, that if people are attending kind of action on the street, that is safe, because I know very commonly that happens to people. Like if you're a deaf activist, you don't hear when police are giving orders and get left behind. That, yeah, again, for things like autism, busy streets are kind of very overwhelming and quite dangerous places. Yeah.
I just want to say, Vicky, with you mentioning the sharing of resources and people shaming you for that, I was involved quite heavily with the organising of the protest for our rights for trans people that happened on the 4th of July. And the sharing of resources online is just as, if not more important to us, because there's a lot of performative activism that's happening surrounding the marches and the protests, whether they be static or actually marching, which is more people showing up to say that they showed up. And people don't actually put the work in behind it. So if you're at home, my opinion on it, and what we put out through Not a Phase as a charity, is that your audience is completely different to my audience and the next person's audience. So by sharing the resources that an organisation puts out, it's so beneficial to us, because the more people it reaches, the greater the power becomes. So I think for the shame that you've received online, it's just a standard case of trolls, and they're awful. But yeah, if you're being an activist from your home with your computer, more power to you. Absolutely. Amazing. I don't think we had any more questions. Did you?
We've got one from Eden. Eden, can I unmute you?
Oh.
Hello.
Hi.
Okay. So addressing what Vicky said, I'm a Black person. So going to protests in person is really quite scary for me because I have such a higher risk of being arrested and picked out of a crowd and stuff like that, especially with stop and search. And also as someone who has anxiety and depression, sometimes going to protests is a huge thing for me, especially because I'm usually going alone and meeting someone there. So I totally understand sometimes not being able to go to protests and having to sit down and share. And as Dani was saying, that's really, really important, especially on social media, because that's how information gets out there, especially with things like videos and updates on what's happening with the process, because recording stuff is such an important thing that's happening now, because because previously history was written by the people who won, and things were so squashed that the real truth isn't out there. So having that information and sharing that is so important, especially because a lot of these things, like with what Dani was saying with the trans protest and Black Lives Matter things and local things, no one would know about those things unless they were shared. So just keep sharing, keep saying things, keep teaching people and supporting, because everything helps, to be quite honest. Even if it's just a little thing, £1 donation, that helps. Sharing it to a few people who are going to see it will help. So yeah, keep doing what you're doing. It's really great work.
And for me, to being the person who does go onto the street corner with a placard, I need the motivation of people online going, yes, keep going. And it's really helpful when you're sitting there for 6 hours, standing there like facing off with the police like that. It's really good to be looking at your Facebook feed and you just hear people going, keep going, keep going, keep going. We can't do it without the people sitting at home encouraging us and keeping us. So it's a really big role just for me as an individual to be able to maintain that street presence, because it can be incredibly dull too, you know. Like there's hours and hours and hours of holding a line with a bunch of police, but it's really necessary for us standing there to hear the encouragement and the people at home going, please keep going, please keep going, please keep going. So yes, there's definitely a role for sitting at home and doing stuff, absolutely.
And for somebody that kind of used to protest on the streets quite actively and now doesn't, I actually, when Extinction Rebellion really started being visible, it was the first time that I felt engaged again, especially with some of the talks that you are given at protests that you miss otherwise. And I even I felt like I sat in on a conversation where they got groups on the ground to kind of get collective ideas for how to move forward with protest, and kind of, it was like, oh, there's actually kind of like almost like seminars and workshops going on here, and it was great to be online and included.
Yeah, because that I think that's the most important part. And like XR is so new, and we are trying so hard. Like for example, even I within my friend, I'm always like this, is because it's actually applause in sign language, and we use sign language within our meetings to make sure that we are accessible to many people. And I think like a phrase that's always stuck with me as someone who, like, I'm Black and I have like a learning disability, so I don't like going to protests, quite frankly. And something that's always stuck with me was someone told me, like, for every one arrestable, there are 20 arrestables behind the scenes making it happen. And that is the people who are shouting on Facebook saying that we're doing a great thing. Those are the people who are controlling the background and making sure that there's someone to pick up that person at a police station. That's us, you know, and we have to remember that like movements need multiple tactics. It's not just about going outside, marching, getting arrested. It's about all the other work that makes that work possible.
Absolutely. Also, I just wanted to tie in with the people that that were talking to you online. I found out recently that of the whole world, only 20% of the world is on Twitter. But of that 20%, 5% make up 80% of the entire of Twitter's content. So there's this tiny, tiny group of the world that is making up all of the content that people see. So it's tiny. So yeah, just keep doing what you're doing, Vicky, and get behind us. We're lifted up on your shoulders, babes.
I think it's also a really, really important thing that people who can't make it outside are able to do the research, because I think there's a lot of people who share things who don't have the research, or people that are marching and they don't really understand what they're marching for. There's lots of people who are out with placards and the placards don't make any sense because the research hasn't been done. So they're riled up by the excitement and then they're outside and they're shouting. And then a week later, they're like, oh no, that placard's actually about me. So I think a lot of the protests can purely be done by reading and researching and condensing that information to give to one person in a paragraph. Because if people can't be bothered to read it themselves, they need somebody to be like, this whole book meant this. And I think being able to share that kind of thing is so important, especially if you're talking to, well, not even especially, if you're talking to children and young people, of how you condense Black British history, which is like a 250,000 page book, into something that's in primary school, or how you share it to the person who has a very odd opinion, but they don't want to do the reading, is how you're able to translate those things. That, yeah, just the reading is enough.
Yeah, Eden, also, you're right in saying that the petitions that people put online, the signing of petitions and the sharing of petitions is really important. It's also, just wanted to say on that, I learned recently that the government are now only taking notice of petitions that are happening on the government website. So the change.org and all of that are not being recognised anymore. One thing I will say, that we do have a broken government. I tried to start a petition 5 weeks ago that would stop the restriction of healthcare to trans youth. And it hasn't even been reviewed, but they're supposed to review it within 5 days. So we do have a broken government in place, but the ones that are live, sharing them and signing them is vital, because we need to make our voices louder.
Ladies, I want this to go on forever. This is incredible. I'm really, really moved. I've just seen in the box, Michelle just said, it feels like reimagining the future requires readdressing the past. And I feel like this could go so much deeper, but I know people have, we said it would be an hour, and just thank you all so much. This is a future I want to be a part of. Dani, you're an amazing host. Thank you, love. We have got, I love you. We put a little survey in the box, and it helps POW be able to do free talks like this. So if you could just fill out the survey and say it was great, that would really help us. We've got some more POW events this week. You can follow our socials for more. And thank you to everyone involved in making tonight so great. And this whole week's been amazing. And tomorrow we're doing making empowerment banners all together, crafting. So if you can come to that, and this is going to go up on YouTube later tonight, so please share it around, because there's some incredible chats. I can't believe, I just feel so honoured and proud that you lot are all part of POW. Thank you. Should we just press bye? It always feels weird, but thank you. Bye. Thank you.
Keep
the conversation going. See you all soon. Thank you.
Bye.
It's so moving.